The night air was sharp with the scent of wood smoke and the slow creak of the wind against the old log cabin. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing shadows that stretched across rough-hewn walls. She sat on the hay-strewn floor, her back pressed against the wall as though even the cabin itself might give way beneath her weight. A child lay in her arms, swaddled in thin cloth, his small breaths the only steady sound in a world that had otherwise fallen apart. Her eyes were heavy, but not from sleep. Sleep had long since abandoned her. Instead, it carried the hollow look of someone who had walked too far in darkness and could no longer see the stars. The door creaked open, and the rancher stepped in. His boots carried the mud of miles, and his coat was marked by dust and time. He paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders shadowing the firelight. And for a moment it seemed the silence between them would stretch forever. He had seen women strong enough to hold their families together when the storms came. He had seen men broken by debts, by drink, by war, but what he saw before him now was something different. She wasn't just weary, she was cracked deep inside, like glass that had held too much weight for too long. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. Not looking up from the child she clutched. "I'm broken." Her words lingered in the air, trembling against the fire's crackle. She did not mean her body was weak, though her thin frame told that story plain enough. What she meant was harder to fix, harder to carry. Her heart was bruised, her spirit torn by things too heavy to name aloud. She said it as if daring him to walk away, to leave her like others had. But the rancher said nothing. He did not argue, nor offer hollow comfort. Instead, he knelt slowly in the straw, the weight of his knees pressing into the earth as though to ground himself. He reached out not for her, but for the baby, whose tiny cries had begun to stir. She held back, just for a breath, then loosened her trembling arms. The child shifted easily into his weathered hands. He rocked the baby gently, the way a man who had once learned tenderness, but rarely shown it, might do. His hands, calloused from rope and reins, held steady as the infant's fussing quieted. Back and forth he moved, slow as the rocking of an old porch chair in summer, his silence carrying more than words ever could. Her gaze rose, wary and uncertain, as though she expected him to falter. Yet he did not. There was no sermon in his eyes, no judgment in his stance, only a quiet steadiness. He had worked long days under the sun, broken horses that refused to bend, mended fences that always seemed to fall again. But this rocking a child was something different, something that stripped away the noise of the world and left only the bare truth of two souls in a cabin where sorrow and hope met in equal measure. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the wooden shutters, rattling them as though the world itself wished to enter. Inside, the fire glowed softer now, warming the floor where she sat. Her arms suddenly empty, yet her chest strangely lighter. Her lips parted as if to speak again, but the words failed her. She had meant her warning, had meant to keep her distance, but watching him there, bent low with a child in his arms. She felt something stirring. She thought she had lost something she wasn't sure she could trust again. The rancher kept rocking, saying nothing, and in that silence lay a choice neither of them dared to name. The baby's breathing grew slow and steady, the rise and fall of his tiny chest marking the only rhythm in the room. She folded her hands in her lap, the trembling easing, though her heart still raced. He had not left. He had not recoiled at her words. And now the night stretched ahead. Heavy with questions neither of them could yet answer. Would he stay when morning came, when the light revealed more than shadows could hide? Would she let him, or would she push him away as she had warned? The fire popped, sending sparks upward, and the cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting. She leaned her head back against the wall, eyes fixed on the man who cradled her child, and wondered if the broken pieces of her could ever fit together again. And there, in that fragile stillness, the story truly began. The cabin walls seemed to listen as the night deepened. The silence inside, broken only by the baby's soft breathing and the occasional crack of the fire. She watched the rancher, his tall frame bent in a way that seemed out of place for a man who carried himself with such quiet strength. He cradled the baby like it was something fragile, something more precious than the rough land outside. The child's small hand rested against his chest, and though he said nothing, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken truths. She drew her knees closer to her chest, wrapping her arms tight around herself, as though bracing against more than just the chill. The words she had whispered still hung in the air, and she wondered if he had truly heard them. "Don T, touch me. I am broken." She meant them, every syllable, yet some part of her regretted them the moment they slipped from her lips. A broken woman, she thought, had no right to expect help, no right to expect gentleness. And yet here he was, the rancher's eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat lifted once toward her. He did not speak, did not press her with questions or promises. Instead, he shifted slightly, as though the motion of rocking the baby was as natural to him as leading a horse to water. His silence was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of a man who had seen things, who knew that words often failed when they were most needed. She wondered what kind of life had shaped him. Men like him did not often come to cabins such as hers unless they wanted something. But what did he want? He seemed out of place here, a figure who belonged under the open sky, out where the prairie stretched wide and endless. His coat smelled faintly of horse and smoke, and his hands, though gentle now, carried the memory of hard work. She could not picture him in the company of women, nor imagine him bending his pride to comfort a stranger's child. And yet, he was doing just that. Her thoughts drifted back to the days before her world had cracked apart. She remembered sunlight streaming through the same cabin window, brighter and warmer than tonight's dull moonlight. She remembered laughter that had once filled the room, though now the sound seemed foreign, like it belonged to another life. Those days were gone. She had been left to gather the pieces, to shield the child from storms she could no longer fight alone. That was why she warned him away. Men, she had learned, could leave as quickly as they came. Still, there was something about this man that unsettled her. It wasn't just his silence. It was the steadiness of his presence, the way he seemed rooted to the ground as though no storm could move him. She could not decide if that frightened her or gave her hope she didn't dare trust. The fire burned lower, and the cabin grew darker. She reached for another log but hesitated, her thin arms trembling with weariness. Before she could rise, the rancher shifted the baby carefully in his arms and set him down in a small wooden cradle by the fire. Then he picked up the log himself, placing it on the embers with practiced ease. Flames sparked, warming the air again. She blinked, unsure whether to thank him or resent him for stepping so easily into her space. He returned to the cradle, his hand brushing lightly over the baby's chest to steady the quilt. She noticed the tenderness in that gesture, so at odds with the ruggedness of his appearance. He did not look at her again, but she could not stop watching him. The wind outside grew louder. Whistling through the cracks of the cabin, she shivered despite the fire's glow, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The rancher finally spoke, his voice low and even. "Storm's coming," he said, glancing toward the window. "Won't be safe to travel till it passes." She swallowed, her throat tight. "I didn't ask you to stay." He nodded as if he had expected her answer. I know, nothing more was said. Yet the silence that followed carried its own weight. He had made it clear he wasn't asking her permission. He wasn't leaving tonight, not with the storm pressing in. She lay down on her straw mattress, though sleep did not come. She listened to the sounds, the fire's soft pop, the rancher's steady breaths, the baby's quiet sighs. For the first time in months, the cabin did not feel empty, and that unsettled her. More than the loneliness ever had, her mind wandered to the questions she didn't dare speak aloud. Who was this man beyond the title of rancher? What had brought him to her door on this night, in this storm? And why did he look at her not with pity but with something else she couldn't name? She knew better than to believe in rescues. Yet a small, dangerous part of her wondered if the brokenness inside her had finally been seen. And if perhaps that wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of something she could not yet imagine. The rancher pulled off his coat, folding it neatly and setting it by the hearth. His shirt was worn at the seams, patched in places by a hand that knew the value of saving rather than wasting. He sat down near the fire, leaning against the wall with the kind of ease that suggested he was no stranger to rough shelter. His eyes closed briefly, but his hand rested still on the cradle, as though guarding the child even in half-sleep. She turned on her side, watching him through the flicker of the flames. His face, lit in the orange glow, was weathered but calm. He looked like a man who had been both hardened and softened by the land. Shaped by its harshness, yet still carrying some quiet reserve of gentleness. It was that contradiction that unsettled her most of all. Outside, the storm began to break. Rain tapped against the roof, steady at first, then heavy, until it drowned the sound of the fire. The walls shook slightly, and the wind pressed harder, but inside the cabin, there was warmth and an uneasy sense of safety. She let her eyes close, though her thoughts spun restless. Morning would come, and with it, choices she wasn't ready to make. The rancher had stepped into her life without asking, and though she had told him to keep his distance, part of her feared she no longer wanted him to. Yet the weight of her brokenness pressed heavy still. She did not know if he could carry it, nor if she would let him try. The baby stirred again, and his small cry broke the silence. The rancher was quick to lift him, his voice low as he murmured something she couldn't quite hear. The child quieted almost instantly, and she felt her chest tighten at the sight. He had managed what she struggled to do. That truth cut deep, though she could not deny it, also filled her with a strange, quiet relief. She turned her face to the wall, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Broken, yes, but not invisible, not forgotten. The night stretched on, the storm outside raging, while another storm churned within her. The rancher's presence was steady, unyielding. She knew the days ahead would not allow her to ignore it. As the fire dimmed and the storm's fury grew, if he could rock her baby to sleep, what else might he be capable of? And if she allowed him near, what would it cost her fragile heart? She shut her eyes tight, but the questions lingered, louder than the thunder. Dawn slid into the cabin, slow and pale. The storm left a clean smell behind, like the land had been scrubbed. She woke to the sound of the rancher moving about the hearth. He had already been outside. His boots were damp. His hat brim dripped. When he turned, she saw he had set a tin cup near the fire to warm. The baby slept, cheeks rosy, breath tiny and even. The rancher nodded to the cup. "Brought water from the barrel," he said. "Creek is running fast." She pushed herself up, the straw scratching at her arms. Her muscles felt like old rope. She took the cup, the heat welcome in her hands, and watched him kneel to check the small cradle again. He studied things with a steadiness that made her uneasy. Men who look close often find what others try to hide. "Storm tore the fence line," he added. "Herd will nose through the gap, if I do not patch it. I can fix it after I see to your woodpile." She wished she could tell him to leave it be, that she did not need a stranger's help. Instead, she said nothing. The cabin roof held. The floor was dry. For now, that was enough. He stepped out once more. When he returned, he set 3 split logs on the hearth and a bundle of kindling beside them. The fire jumped. He moved with quick care, as if he had learned long ago that speed without thought only buys trouble. She broke her quiet then. "You said you were a rancher. Where is your outfit?" He kept his eyes on the fire. "West Ridge. A day's ride if the trail is kind. Closer if a man pushes. I came down the draw to check a strayed mare. Found your light." "Found you." She tried to read his face, but saw only the same strong calm as before. "You have work to do at your place," she said. "I do," he answered. "There is work everywhere." She did not push. Her throat tightened anyway. She had learned to measure cost. Every favor has a price. Every hand that reaches in can pull out too much. By noon, the clouds had thinned. Sunlight laid bright squares on the floorboards. The rancher rigged a small line and set wet clothes near the chimney. He repaired a loose hinge on the door with a nail taken from his saddlebag. He said little. She watched and wondered how a man like that had time for a cabin that belonged to another. The baby stirred and she lifted him. He felt heavier, stronger, as if the night's sleep had added ounces to his small frame. The rancher looked over. She did not meet his eyes at first. When she finally did, her voice came low. "You asked nothing of me," she said. "Nothing," he replied. "You should." "People always do." He shook his head. "I do not need stories you are not ready to give." The words stung not because they were harsh, but because they were kind. Kindness can be a blade. It finds the thin places and presses there. That afternoon, he repaired the fence as promised. She stood in the doorway with the child and watched him carry posts and wire across the muddy yard. He wore no coat and his shirt clung to him. Each time he drove a staple, the thud carried across the yard like a steady drum. She could not recall the last time a man worked for her without asking what he would get for it. When he finished, he walked the line and tested the pull of the wire. He came back, set the hammer by the step, and took a long drink from his canteen. He caught her watching. "Herd will test it," he said. "But it should hold." "Thank you," she answered, and the thanks sounded strange in her mouth. She was not used to saying it. He tipped his hat and almost smiled. Almost. The days that followed fell into a slow rhythm. He rose before first light, fed the fire, hauled water, and slipped outside. He did not move into the cabin. He slept near the lean-to in a bedroll. She had offered him the floor inside once. He shook his head. He said a man should feel the night air. She wondered if he feared being too close, or if he wanted to spare her the strain of sharing such a small space. Either way, he stayed near and yet not beyond reach. Between chores, he taught her small things about the land that sat just beyond the window. He showed her how to read the tracks by the creek and where a fox crossed under the fence. He pointed out a cottonwood that had a split trunk and said it was a marker if the trail got lost in spring flood. He never preached. He showed and then stepped back. She listened because she knew she would soon be alone again. A woman on the frontier could not afford to depend. Still, her mind kept circling the same fear. Her past did not knock first. It blew in like a bad wind. She had warned him. "I am broken." The words tasted of ash now. They explained nothing and yet said too much. On the third morning, a rider came up the draw. The rancher saw him first. He had been cutting kindling and looked up, and his hand went to the rope looped at his saddle horn. The rider wore a long coat and carried himself with the easy grace of someone familiar with trouble. When he drew near, she stepped back into the shadows of the cabin doorway and clutched the baby tight. The rider pulled to a stop and doffed his hat to her, then looked to the rancher. "Morning," he said. "I am hunting a sorrel gelding with a star like a coin between the eyes. He ran some time before the storm. Tracks come this way." The rancher's face gave nothing away. "Saw no sorrel," he answered. "Fence near the north corner broke. Fixed it. Any brand on the horse?" "A double bar," the rider said. "Belongs to the ridge spread." He smiled then. The smile did not reach his eyes. "Belongs to me." The rancher rolled his shoulder as if easing a knot. "I keep a small herd in that direction. I know the brand." The rider's gaze moved past him and into the dim cabin. Did not know this place was taken. Thought the old claim was empty. His look lingered on her longer than it should have. "You alone out here, ma'am?" She did not answer. The rancher stepped a little to the side, casual as a man shifting his weight, yet somehow between her and the rider. "She is not alone," he said. The rider tipped his hat again, but she saw the flicker in his eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or curiosity sharpened by pride. "Much obliged," he said. "If you see that sorrel, tell the sheriff I'll be at the river crossing come week's end. He turned his horse with a nudge of his heel and rode off slow. Not quick, like a man with time. When he vanished over the rise, the rancher let out a long breath. He looked toward the creek, then back at the path. He did not explain his caution. He did not have to. She felt it too. The rider wore trouble like a badge. The land carried that kind of man the way a current carries a log. He will be back if he smells profit. That evening, the rancher checked the latch on the door twice. He placed the hammer within her reach and showed her how to brace the door with the wood bar when night fell. He spoke low. "If anyone comes late, do not answer," he said. "If it is me, I will call your name from the oak." "You know my name?" she asked softly. He paused. "Not yet," he said. She turned away and smoothed the blanket in the cradle. She did not give him what he had not asked for. Names carry power. Once spoken, they can be used in ways you cannot call back. On the fourth day, rumors reached them by way of the peddler's wife who drove her wagon by the creek, selling thread and news in equal measure. She spoke of the sheriff riding from claim to claim with a stack of papers tied in twine. There was talk of the railroad survey cutting near the ridge, and of deeds that might not stand if the line moved closer. She looked at the cabin and shook her head. "Some folk will be told their homes were never theirs," the woman said. "A stamp and a signature can change the whole of a life. If there is no deed, a strong back may count less than ink." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Who sent that news?" he asked. "Town clerk," the peddler's wife said. "And the banker who smiled too wide when he said it, after she left?" The rancher walked the yard with a piece of spare wire as if he could mend worry the way he mended fence. She finally asked the question she had been fighting to keep inside. "If the paper says this cabin is not mine, what happens to us?" He watched a hawk circle high above the cottonwood before he answered. "I do not know. I will ride to the sheriff tomorrow and find out what I can. If the survey pushes hard, many will be moved. The ridge spread, the small homesteads, maybe even my line cabin on the north slope. This land was taken and taken again long before we came to it." She heard the weight in his voice then. Something like an old grievance. "You could lose your place too," she said. "I could," he replied. That night she did not sleep. She sat by the fire and held the baby and counted the small crack lines in the clay of the hearth as if they were a map. The rancher sat outside near the lean-to with his back to the cabin wall. Every so often she heard him shift. The world felt like a table with one leg cut short. Everything wobbled. The next morning he saddled his horse at first light. He stood at the threshold and waited for her eyes. "I will be back by dark," he said. She wanted to say, "Do not go." She wanted to say, "Take us with you." She said neither. "Be careful," she told him. He nodded once. He reached for the cradle, then stopped himself and stepped back, as if the touch would pull him off course. He mounted and rode toward town. The day stretched thin. She tried to busy her hands. She scrubbed the floorboards with a rag until her knuckles smarted. She baked a small flat of bread and waited for it to cool. She sang to the baby the way her mother had once sung to her. The notes felt strange on her tongue, yet the child calmed. She almost felt peace, and then a shadow crossed the doorway. The rider from before sat his horse at the edge of the yard. He smiled a slow smile that showed nothing of warmth. "Afternoon," he said. "I told you I would be at the crossing by week's end, but I took a different turn. Word is the sheriff plans to post papers. I collect things that are owed. Maybe I can help you read what those papers say." She tightened her grip on the baby and stood straighter. "We do not need help." "That's so?" he said, eyes glittering with a kind of interest that felt like a cold draft. "This cabin sits on a fine bend in the creek. Good water. Easy forage. I could use a place like this if the survey shifts brands and borders. It is not for sale," she said. "I did not say buy," he answered, voice light as if he were commenting on the weather. He tipped his hat. "Tell your man I came by. He is not my man," she said before she could stop. Herself, "Then he will not mind if I visit when he is away." He turned the horse and rode off. As he moved past the fence, he looked down at the line the rancher had repaired. He laughed under his breath, not loud. like a man who had already found the loose post he would test. When the rancher returned near dark, she told him only that a rider had come and gone. She kept back the words the man used because she did not want to give them more life. The rancher listened, then stood still in the doorway a long time. The sheriff was not at his office, he said at last. Town was humming like a hive. A train crew unloaded timber. Men in clean coats and city hats stood in a knot and spoke numbers to each other. Serves notice that the line will come past the ridge if the river holds. They mean to pay some. They mean to push others. I cannot find what paper applies to this cabin. I will ride back tomorrow. He ate little that night. He stared at the fire as if trying to measure the distance between flame and ash. When the baby woke, he rocked him without being asked. The small body relaxed in his arms. She watched and felt that same strange ache. Safety and danger braided together. By the 5th day, the valley buzzed with talk. A neighbor from 2 gullies over stopped by and warned that cattle had gone missing near the ridge. Another spoke of a stranger at the saloon who asked too many questions about unattended claims. The preacher sent a boy to tell people to gather for prayer at the schoolhouse because the times felt uncertain. The boy also carried a note that the banker would be at the meeting as well. That detail soured the hope in the message. A side worry crept in then. She kept a small tin box under a floorboard. It held a cloth ribbon, a lock of hair, and a folded piece of paper at the length of her hand. She had not shown it to anyone. The paper did not carry a deed stamp. It carried a promise in a rough hand, a promise from a man who had not returned. She had thought the box held memory. Now she wondered if it held proof that could hurt more than help. Late that afternoon, the rancher found tracks by the creek. Boot prints. 2 sets, one light and one heavy. One set circled the yard and paused by the window. He called her outside and pointed to the damp earth where the marks still showed. He did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice stayed even. "We will take turns keeping watch tonight," he said. "If I say go, you take the baby and run to the cottonwood and do not stop." Fear tried to crawl up her spine. She forced herself to breathe. "Will the sheriff come soon with the papers?" she asked. "He will," the rancher said, and his tone held no comfort. "But we do not know what they will say." He set a lantern on the table and tested the door bar again. He checked the window shutter and tied it with new cord. He moved like a man planning for weather that might never break. She boiled water and set bread on the table without appetite. The baby slept, one fist resting under his chin. The night swelled around the cabin like a tide. The rancher sat near the door, the hammer on the floor by his boot. She took the chair by the cradle, the tin box await under the floorboards. Wind moved through the grass outside with a whisper like a warning. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed, then fell silent as if a hand pressed over its mouth. She thought of the railroad crew in their clean coats, and of the rider whose smile never reached his eyes, and of the sheriff stacking papers that could erase a life. She thought of the rancher, who asked nothing and gave much, and of the secret in the tin box that could undo what small piece they had found. She thought of the baby who had done none of this and yet would pay if she chose wrong. Near midnight, a soft boot step scraped against the yard plank. Another followed. Then a low knock came on the door, not harsh, not hurried. A careful knock. The rancher lifted his head and met her gaze. He raised one hand, palm flat, asking for quiet. The knock came again, followed by a voice she did not recognize, calm and civil. "Evening," the voice said. "I carry a message from the sheriff. I also bring a paper that concerns this cabin." The rancher did not answer. He leaned close to the door, his ear near the wood. The man outside waited. In the cradle, the baby shifted and made a small sound. The night held its breath. She slid her fingers beneath the loose board until they found the edge of the tin box. The metal felt cold. The rancher's eyes flicked to her hands, then back to the door. The voice outside spoke again, a shade softer. "Open up, and no one gets bothered," the man said. "Or keep us waiting, and we might call more company." Wind pressed the cabin wall. The lantern flame trembled. The rancher rose without a word, and she could not tell whether he meant to open the door or bar it tighter. And in that thin moment between choice and act, the knock came a third time. Sharper than before, the knock echoed through the small cabin again. This time sharp enough to rattle the door on its hinges. She clutched the baby tighter, the sound jolting her heart into a gallop. The rancher's hand rested on the door bar, his body tense, his shoulders squared in the dim glow of the lantern. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding hers. And with just that glance, she knew he was weighing whether to answer or to hold the line. The night pressed close. The storm-washed silence outside, broken only by that voice that still carried a too calm edge. "Sheriff's business," the man repeated. "Papers need a signature. A cabin can't stand without it." The rancher didn't move, but she saw the smallest twitch in his jaw. He knew the tone was wrong. A real sheriff wouldn't come in the dead of night with his words slippery as oil. Whoever stood outside was no lawman. Whatever paper he carried was not meant to protect her. The baby stirred against her chest, making a soft sound. She rocked him gently, desperate to hush the tiny noise, but the quiet whimper slipped into the air. The rancher heard it too. His hand tightened on the door bar. The knock came a third time, harder now. "Open this door, and let's talk proper," the voice demanded. "It'll be worse if we're kept waiting." She could barely breathe. The tin box beneath the floor seemed to throb in her memory. Inside it lay that folded paper, the one she had hidden for so long. It was not an official deed. It was nothing more than a promise scratched out in a rough hand. But she knew if the wrong eyes saw it, it could be twisted, used, or destroyed. And if these men outside had come for it, no nailed bar would keep them out forever. The rancher lifted the hammer from the floor with slow, deliberate care. He pressed a finger to his lips, urging her to silence. Then, with the faintest nod, he moved toward the shuttered window instead of the door. He cracked the edge just enough to see. The fire popped, filling the silence with a sound that felt too loud. She waited, heart pounding, as he looked through the sliver of wood. When he turned back, his face was shadowed, but she caught the steel in his eyes. Two men, horses at the fence. Not one voice, but at least two waiting in the dark. He mouthed the words without sound. Not the sheriff. Her stomach dropped. The rancher lowered the shutter and moved back to the door, his body blocking it fully now. The men outside shifted, boots scraping against dirt. One of them gave a short, sharp whistle. Another horse stirred. The air was thick with threat. "You've got till I count 3, the voice warned. Then we stopped being polite. She wanted to cry out, to beg them to leave, but her throat closed tight. The baby whimpered again, his tiny cry swallowed by her trembling hand against his back. The rancher set the hammer down on the table, then pulled his rope free from his belt. She didn't understand at first. But then she saw the way he looped it quick and tight around the door bar, anchoring it across the frame. He was buying them time. One, the voice outside called. The rancher crossed the cabin in 3 strides and lifted the cradle, placing it beside her with a steady hand. His eyes locked on hers. He pointed once toward the loose board where the tin box lay hidden. She froze, shaking her head. But his look was firm. He wanted her ready, too. She could feel the walls themselves listening. The firelight flickered, shadows jerking across the log walls like restless spirits. The rancher stood tall now, one hand on the hammer, the other near the rope knot that held the bar. He was ready for the door to break. Then the third count never came. Instead, a new sound split the night, the crack of a rifle fired from somewhere near the trees. The shot didn't strike the cabin, but it whistled close enough to shatter the stillness. The baby cried out, sharp and shrill. She clutched him close, rocking him hard, panic rushing through her. "Next one won't be a warning," the voice called. "Open, or we make you open." The rancher moved fast, dousing the lantern with a flick of his hand. Darkness fell heavy inside the cabin. Only the glow from the fire and the hearth lit the room now, weak and flickering. The smell of smoke and oil filled her nose. She could barely make out his silhouette, broad and unmoving by the door. Her mind raced. Who were these men? Did they work for the rider who had come days before? Or were they tied to the railroad men, eager to sweep aside anyone without papers strong enough to stand in court. Every path her thoughts took ended in fear. Outside, the horses shifted again. Boots scuffed against dirt. Then came the sound of something heavy being dragged wood against ground, or perhaps a log carried close. They weren't leaving. They were preparing. The rancher leaned close enough for her to hear his whisper over the baby's cries. "Stay low. Do not move till I say." Her hand shook, but she nodded. The baby's wails cut sharp against the night, and she pressed her lips to his small head. Whispering words she didn't even hear herself saying. The first blow struck the door then, hard enough to shake the frame. The bar held, the rope stretched taut, but the sound was enough to rattle her bones. Another blow followed, then another, the wood groaning under the assault. The rancher stood braced, ready for the moment when the line gave way. She slid her foot across the floor, pressing against the loose board until she felt it shift. The tin box was there, waiting. She didn't know why her hands sought it now, only that some instinct told her she might need it before the night was done. The pounding stopped. Silence pressed in again, thick and dangerous. The rancher waited, muscles taut. Then came a different sound, the faint scrape of someone moving toward the back. "Wall there circling," he whispered. Her blood turned cold. The back wall had no bar, no rope, only a shuttered window. She glanced toward it, then back to him. He motioned for her to stay put, his body tense as he turned slightly, listening. A voice outside called again, mocking now. "Nice cabin. Shame if fire found it." Dry wood burns quick. The rancher's head tilted, listening hard. She could see in the lines of his face that he was making a choice. Fire was a threat worse than bullets. A blaze in the night would trap them with no escape. Her pulse hammered. If the men truly meant to set fire, the baby wouldn't survive the smoke. She pressed him tight to her chest, his cries now softer but still insistent. His small body trembling with her own fear. The rancher lifted the hammer, moving toward the back wall with a steadiness that made her breath catch. He didn't look back at her this time. His silence was heavy, deliberate. He was preparing for whatever came through that shutter. A low laugh drifted in from the dark. "Broken door, broken woman. Don't matter how you bar it. Everything here is ours, sooner or later." The words hit her like a slap. Her chest ached, and her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. They didn't know her story, didn't know the weight she already carried. Yet the cruel truth in their tone pressed against her deepest wound. Broken, she had said the same herself. But hearing it now, hurled like a weapon, sparked something inside that felt dangerously close to fire. The night grew sharper. The silence stretched thinner, and she knew the moment they had all been circling was nearly at hand. The men outside would strike again. The rancher was set, every muscle coiled. She clutched the tin box tighter in one hand, the baby in the other. Torn between dread and the fierce need to protect what little she had left, the fire in the hearth sputtered, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the horses stamped, restless. Then came the sound of boots rushing, fast and sure, and the first slam against the shutter at the back wall. The wood shuddered. The rancher lifted the hammer high. She held her breath, waiting for the moment when the cabin would no longer hold, when all the fear, all the waiting, would crash into the firelight and force the truth into the open. The baby whimpered again, his tiny cry swallowed by the roar of her pulse. The night was ready to break. She knew nothing would ever be the same once it did. The shutter at the back wall shook again under the weight of the blow. The rancher raised the hammer high, his shoulders squared in the flickering firelight. Another strike splintered the wood, and through the crack she saw the glint of an eye and the smear of a grin. The baby whimpered, and she pressed his face into her shoulder, rocking him fast, whispering words as if her breath alone might shield him from the danger pressing in. The next slam came harder, but before the wood could give way, the rancher swung. The hammer came down with the force of a man who had worked the land his whole life, the sound echoing through the cabin like a gunshot. A shout rang out outside, sharp and surprised. Another set of boots scrambled backward in the dirt. She didn't see what the hammer struck, but she knew it had been close enough to scatter the courage of whoever had dared reach through. Silence fell again, broken only by the ragged breathing of the men outside. The rancher pressed his back to the wall, chest heaving, hammer still ready. He turned just enough to look at her. His eyes were fierce, but steady. "They'll try fire," he whispered. "Get ready." Her stomach dropped. She clutched the baby tighter, but her free hand slipped beneath the floorboard and pulled up the tin box. It felt heavier than ever, though inside it held only scraps of memory and one folded piece of paper. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. She stared at the handwriting, faded but still clear. The promise scrawled by the man who had once claimed this land and sworn to make it theirs. He hadn't come back, but the paper remained, like a ghost. Bootsteps circled again. A low voice muttered something she couldn't catch. Then the sharp strike of flint against steel sparked outside. The smell of smoke slithered under the wall. Her heart lurched. They meant to burn them out. The rancher's jaw tightened. He crossed the cabin in 3 steps and grabbed his coat from the peg. He threw it across the baby in her arms, shielding him from the smoke that might come. Then he dropped to one knee and spoke quickly, his voice firm. "If they light the walls, take the child and run to the cottonwood. Do not stop. Do not look back." Her throat closed. "And you?" "I'll hold them," he said simply. The words cut her open. She wanted to argue, to beg, but the pounding of her heart drowned her voice. She looked down at the tin box, the promise inside, and knew what she had to do. She rose, clutching both the baby and the paper, and walked to the rancher's side. Her knees trembled, but her voice did not when she spoke. "This land is mine. He wrote it, and it's the only proof I have. If they want it, they'll have to take it from me." The rancher looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes, then something else, respect. He gave a single nod. The fire outside hissed, catching on damp kindling. Smoke curled upward but faltered. The storm had left everything soaked, and the men struggled to spark flame in the wet night. Their curses carried through the dark. One called out again, angrier now. "Hand it over, or the cabin won't stand till morning." She stepped to the door before the rancher could stop her. She laid her hand on the bar, her heart racing. Then, with her voice steady but loud enough to carry, she answered, "You can't take what isn't yours. This cabin stands because I made it stand. You want paper? I have it. But you'll never see it, not while I'm alive." The night went still. For a long moment, no one moved. Then laughter broke from the other side of the door, harsh and sharp. "Brave words," the voice sneered, "but paper won't stop men who know how to push." Before the rancher could pull her back, a new sound rolled through the dark, the heavy thud of hooves, many of them. Lanterns bobbed between the trees and voices called out, firm and familiar. "Sheriff's riders. Lay down your arms." The men outside cursed, boots pounded, horses snorted. In a rush of noise, the attackers mounted and fled into the night. The sound of retreating hooves faded fast, swallowed by the hills. For a long moment, the only sound left was the crackle of the fire and the baby's soft cry. The rancher eased the bar from the door and pulled it open. Lantern light spilled in, carried by 2 deputies and the sheriff himself. His weathered face looked tired but sharp. He dismounted and stepped forward, eyes moving from the rancher to her, then to the child in her arms. "We got word of trouble from a rider down the ridge," the sheriff said. "Men trying to scare folks off, claims that don't suit the railroad. Looks like we came just in time." Her knees nearly gave way. Relief surged through her, mixed with exhaustion so deep it made her sway. The rancher's hand steadied her arm, firm and grounding. The sheriff studied her close. "You have paper for this cabin?" She hesitated, then lifted the tin box. With trembling fingers, she drew out the folded page. She handed it over, her chest tight as he read. The sheriff's brow furrowed. "This isn't a deed," he said, "but it's a sworn promise, witnessed by a man whose name I know. He had standing in this county. Might not hold in every court, but it holds enough here. I'll mark it. This place is yours." Her throat closed, tears burning her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. The sheriff folded the paper carefully and handed it back. Keep it safe. Times are changing. The railroad will fight hard, but not every claim can be bought or broken. You've got proof enough for now. He tipped his hat, then motioned for his men to follow. We'll ride after the ones who ran. Stay sharp tonight. When the riders left, silence settled again. The rancher closed the door and set the bar back in place. Then he turned to her. His eyes softened in the glow of the fire. You stood tall, he said quietly. Taller than most men I've known. Her chest ached with the weight of his words. She looked down at the baby, now drifting into sleep against her shoulder, and then back at him. I thought I was broken, she whispered. But maybe broken things can still stand if someone helps carry the weight. He stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly over the baby's blanket, then resting on the cradle. His silence carried more than any promise. The days that followed brought calm the land had not seen in weeks. The sheriff's men drove off the troublemakers. The railroad crews pushed their line farther west, away from the creek for now. The cabin stood, stronger than she had believed it could. The rancher did not leave. He mended the roof, cut new posts for the fence, and planted seed in the patch of soil beside the cabin. He said little of his own ranch on the ridge, only that it would keep without him for a time. She did not ask when he might go. Some questions are better left until the heart is ready for the answer. In the evenings, when the baby slept, she sat by the fire with the tin box resting close. The paper inside was still worn, still fragile, but no longer just a memory of a broken promise. It was proof that she had stood her ground, proof that she had not been erased. The rancher sometimes rocked the child to sleep, his rough hands steady, his voice low as he hummed tunes she did not know. Each time she felt the sharp edge of her fear soften, she knew the land would test them again. Fences fall. Storms rise. Men with greed return. But she also knew she was not alone anymore. It's not in the way that once hollowed her out. One night, as the fire burned low, she looked at the rancher across the room. He met her eyes, and for the first time, she did not look away. You didn't have to stay, she said. He nodded slowly. Maybe not. But some places are worth holding. Some people too. Her breath caught, but she didn't speak. She only reached out and set her hand on the edge of the cradle, her fingers brushing his. The baby stirred, but did not wake. The fire crackled, steady and warm. The cabin walls that once felt like a cage now felt like shelter. The night outside was dark, but inside there was light enough to carry them forward. Broken or not, she had found a way to stand. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed tomorrow might come with more than just struggle. It might come with hope. And as the wind moved through the cottonwood outside, carrying the sound of leaves whispering against each other, she knew this story. Her story was no longer one of loss alone. It was one of endurance, of finding strength in unlikely hands, and of remembering that even in the roughest land, love could still take root and grow.